Subsequent assault waves faced withering Japanese fire, especially around White One Beach. Of the 18 Sherman tanks assigned to the 1st Marines, only one reaches shore intact. The Marines pushed roughly 100 meters inland before being pinned down by fire from a previously undetected ridge. Meanwhile, the point rakes the entire beach with devastating crossfire. Captain George Hunt's K Company, already down 15% of its men, maneuvers inland to strike from the flank. Lieutenant William Willis recalls the assault. "I sat on a rock, lit a cigarette, and tried to figure the best way to take out that pillbox. A squad covered the rear. I tossed a smoke grenade near the embrasure and ran to Anderson, who was readying a rifle grenade. His shot landed perfectly, igniting something inside. I heard screams. 3 Japanese soldiers burst out, their ammunition belts popping and their legs aflame. The squad finished them off as they stumbled out. Hunt's men captured point, but the 1st Marines remain exposed. Gaps appear between companies, though the Japanese do not exploit them. Resistance is lighter on Orange 1 and 2 beaches, but intensifies on Orange 3, where automatic weapons and mortars fire from nearby islets. Some landing vehicles, unable to reach Orange 3, drop their troops on Orange 2 instead, causing confusion. War correspondent Tom Leah, landing with the 7th Marines, describes the chaos. "I hit the sand just as a mortar whistled too close. A moment later, I saw a man stagger toward the LVTs. Half his face was a bloody pulp, one arm torn to shreds. The other half of his face showed the most haunting look of patience I've ever seen. Then he fell in a red puddle on the white beach." The 7 Marines encounter an unexpected anti-tank ditch, which ironically provides cover and a moment to regroup, yet progress slows as they reach an unmapped swamp. Casualties mount, and despite no formal request, General Rupertus commits reserve units. Several Marine officers later criticized the move. The enemy was disorganized and cut off, though still fighting hard. At no time did we consider him capable of a major counterattack. We never asked for reinforcements. The beachhead was already overcrowded. At 5:30 p.m., roughly 500 Japanese infantry and 13 light Hago tanks launch a counterattack across the airfield. The tanks surge ahead, leaving the infantry behind, and the assault collapses. The 5th Marines, expecting such an attack, destroy all but 2 tanks. By nightfall on September 15th, the Marines hold the beach but fail to meet their D-Day goals. K Company remains isolated at the point, repelling repeated counterattacks, while Japanese infiltrators probe Marine lines after dark. By D+1, the 1st Marine Division has suffered about 1,100 casualties, 200 of them killed. With many officers dead and communications shattered, the true losses are unclear. Dozens more collapsed from heat exhaustion or illness. Contaminated water, shipped in unclean gasoline drums, sickens many. The next day's objectives are to link up with the point and seize the airfield. Their Marines must charge over open ground, expose the fire from Japanese bunkers and mortar positions. Just days before D-Day, Admiral William Halsey, commanding the Western Pacific Task Force, argued for canceling the renamed Stalemate 2. His aircraft detected minimal Japanese presence on Mindanao and suggested bypassing both Morotai and Palau in favor of invading Leyte Island in the Philippines. MacArthur agreed and canceled the Morotai landing, but Nimitz insisted the Palau operation continue. Its harbor was valuable, and the troops were already en route. Major General William Rupertus, commander of the 1st Marine Division, assured him the fight would be brief. It will be a short, hard-fought operation, 4 days, maybe 5. He promised. You can be sure the 1st Marine Division will take Peleliu. The invasion went ahead, and Nimitz's decision became one of the most debated of the Pacific War. Japanese intelligence expected an American assault on the entire Palau chain, which held several air and naval bases. Most troops remained on Babel Day, the largest island, but correctly predicted the attack would begin in the south. They heavily reinforced Peleliu and Angaur, committing roughly half the Palau garrison. The elite 14th Division, redeployed from China, formed the defense's backbone, aided by naval personnel, stranded airmen, and engineers. They also employed new defensive tactics. In earlier battles, Japanese troops had tried to repel invasions at the shoreline, suffering massive losses under American bombardments. Now, new orders emphasized defense in depth, contesting landings but focusing on long-term resistance to exhaust Allied forces. Their manual stated, "In view of the enemy's overwhelming naval and air bombardment, it is essential to use terrain, weather clouds, mist, and smoke to our advantage. If we carefully exploit these conditions, our strength will not be rapidly depleted." The Japanese also abandoned mass banzai charges, now seen as futile since U.S. forces had learned to counter them. Marine Captain George Hunt noted their psychological power had faded. When he shouts banzai, it's only to convince himself of his courage. If it's meant to shake ours, it fails miserably. On Peleliu, Japanese commanders Colonel Kunio Nakagawa and Major General Kenjo Murai fortified critical terrain, such as the Yumurbagal Mountains. They built bunkers and blockhouses into coral ridges, reinforcing them with concrete and steel. Caves linked positions, while mines and obstacles channeled invaders into carefully planned kill zones. Civilians, including native Pelons, were evacuated before the battle began. Eugene Sledge, who singled out the airfield attack as the most horrific episode, remembered it like a World War I nightmare. Suicidal infantry advancing through a constant sheet of shell fire. The farther we went, the worse it got. The noise and concussion closed on my ears like a vice. To be shelled in the open is a terror beyond the understanding of anyone who hasn't been through it. The attack across Peleliu's airfield was the worst combat experience I had in the whole war. By the next day, Marine units had driven the Japanese from the airfield, pushed across the island, and secured the south. But resistance hardened in the Yumurbagal Mountains, and the 1st Marines continued to pay a steep price while fighting to the coral ridges. Those jagged formations made defensive works and movement a maddening maze. Marines could not dig in. Every time a man hit the deck, the coral tore his boots, clothes, and skin. Mortar bursts hurled chunks of coral in all directions, multiplying the fragmentation effect and increasing casualties. The fighting concentrated around Hill 20205, with U.S. and Japanese positions forming dangerous salients. Marines climbed near vertical slopes, while Japanese troops slipped in and out of caves to fire at them. By D+2, the 1st Marines had taken roughly 1/3 casualties. Even non-combat personnel were pressed into service as riflemen. Meanwhile, on D+2, the 81st Infantry Division landed on Ongar against lighter but still determined opposition. Japanese defenders employed the same depth-oriented tactics and fought to the death. One Marine recalled attackers pouring out a bunker. "The first man came at us with a samurai sword. I shot the sword-bearer, then dropped into a squat and fired as more Japs came out. My men behind me were firing too. The 81st paid dearly, about 260 killed, in taking Ongar. Only 59 of the island's 1,400-strong Japanese garrison survived." As Marine casualties mounted on Peleliu, commanders urged Major General Rupertus to replace worn-out Marines with Army units from the 81st. He refused, a decision many attribute in part to inter-service friction. Over the following days, Marines continued to secure the island's eastern sectors, but gains in the mountains were painfully slow and costly. Fatigue and dehumanization set in. One Marine described the change bluntly. "I picked up a dead Marine's rifle and went up the hill. I didn't worry about death anymore. I had resigned from the human race." The next foxhole held a rifleman with red, painful eyes. He didn't care about me, and I didn't care about him. As a fighting unit, the 1st Marines were finished. We were no longer human. I fired at anything that moved, friend or foe. I had no friends. I just wanted to kill. By D+6, 1st Marine casualties reached 1,749, about 56%. 1st Battalion was hardest hit, suffering 71% losses and losing all its original platoon leaders. Only after Major General Geiger intervened was Rupertus finally relieved. The Army's 321st Regimental Combat Team took over. U.S. Army units secured a tenuous road along the western mountain flank and began supporting operations in northern Peleliu. Although reinforcements arrived for Japanese from other islands, by D+12, only the Yumurbagal pocket remained in enemy hands. U.S. forces converged on an area known as Bloody Nose Ridge, where defenders concentrated on strong points called the Horseshoe and the Five Sisters. Once area reconnaissance exposed the extent of the obstacles, commanders shifted to siege tactics to blunt casualties. 5th Marines Commander Colonel Harold Harris summed up the new approach. "I intend be lavish with ammunition and stingy with men's lives." Bulldozers, flamethrower-equipped LVTs, high explosives, white phosphorus, thermite grenades, and demolitions became the tools of advance. Captain Hunt later described the incendiary grenades' awful effects. Japanese soldiers caught fire. Their ammunition belts detonated like strings of firecrackers as they ran into the water, rolling and burning as flames clung to them. The water offered no refuge. Even with these measures, American losses stayed high. Features like the Five Sisters had to be assaulted simultaneously to prevent counterattacks, and repeated attempts failed. The grind wore down morale. As it dragged on and the casualties mounted, a sense of despair pervaded us. It seemed the only escape was to be killed or wounded. The will for self-preservation weakened. Many men became intensely fatalistic. Somehow you could never quite picture your own death. It was always the next man, but getting wounded felt inevitable. You couldn't beat the law of averages forever. By D+27, the Japanese pocket had shrunk to roughly 700 by 450 meters. Nakagawa reported only about 700 exhausted troops left. The Marines themselves were spent by D+32 and were fully relieved by the 81st Infantry Division, with air support from the reopened airfield. High explosive bombs were limited help. Coral fragments made friendly fire risk severe, so aircraft used newly developed napalm. An Army engineer recalled one ridge where napalm bombs were dropped, followed by mortar barges that set the whole formation ablaze. They just went up. Napalm ignited all along that ridge and ran into their living quarters. You couldn't bomb them out. They were burned out. Air attacks were astonishingly brief. The actual run to the target sometimes lasted only about 15 seconds. Even so, it took U.S. troops another 6 weeks to clear the island. On D+54, Nakagawa reported his men were through and asked permission to mount a Gyokusai, suicidal, attack. Headquarters refused. A Japanese soldier later reflected, "Dying was easier than continuing to live. It took all our energy to live." Nakagawa continued resisting. Only on D+70 did he send his final radio message, "Sakura, Sakura," signaling the end of formal resistance. He and Murai then committed ritual suicide, while the last 56 men carried out night infiltrations. Mopping up operations continued until November 27, D+73, though isolated holdouts lurked for years, in one notorious case until 1954. A surrendering survivor who finally gave himself up 3 years later summed the island up plainly. The whole island was rock, rock, rock. It was horrible. The battles for Peleliu and Angar cost U.S. forces about 10,500 casualties, roughly 2,000 killed. Japanese losses were approximately 10,000, almost all dead. U.S. troops captured about 360 prisoners on Palau, mostly Korean or Okinawan laborers. The heavy American price provoked sharp debate. Was Peleliu worth it? Rupertus was relieved and effectively demoted. Admiral Nimitz also drew criticism for approving the operation. Supporters argued Peleliu secured MacArthur's flank for the Philippines campaign, denied Japanese air and reinforcement bases in Palau, removed veteran Japanese units, and provided forward air bases, and that the campaign taught hard lessons about new Japanese tactics. Detractors counted that by March 1944 Allied air attacks had largely destroyed Japanese aircraft and long-range shipping around Palau, isolating the garrison and lessening its threat. They also argued the bomber base at Angar offered little real help for the Philippines offensive. In September 1944, the U.S. 1st Marine Division sails toward another amphibious assault in the Pacific, the small island of Peleliu. For nearly half of the Marines, this would be their first taste of combat against battle-hardened Japanese troops using a new defensive strategy. Some U.S. commanders urge the operation's cancellation, but proceeds. By the end, half the Marines and nearly all the Japanese defenders will be dead or wounded. The question remains, was Peleliu worth the cost? By mid-1944, U.S. forces have breached Japan's national defense zone. While Admiral Chester Nimitz's Pacific Fleet advances through island-hopping campaigns from Tarawa to the Marianas, General Douglas MacArthur's Allied troops push through the Solomons and New Guinea, cutting off a major Japanese base at Rabaul. MacArthur seeks to liberate the Philippines and plans to seize Morotai Island as a launch point for Mindanao. To protect his flank, he also aims to capture the Palaus, including Peleliu. Operation Stalemate is assigned to Nimitz's 3rd Amphibious Corps, led by 36,000 men of the 1st Marine Division and the reserve 81st Infantry Division. The 81st is newly reactivated, while the 1st Marines are seasoned, though by September 1944, 40% are new replacements. Japanese resistance in the Marianas that July delays planning for stalemate. Many experienced staff remain in the Marianas, leaving less seasoned planners to handle the operation. The original plan called for capturing all the Palau Islands, but due to the delay, objectives are reduced to Peleliu, Ongar, and Jessabus. Major General Roy Geiger, commander of the 3rd Amphibious Corps, takes over too late to make significant changes before the September 15 start. Just before D-Day, Admiral William Halsey, commander of the Western Pacific Task Force, argues for cancellation. His reconnaissance finds little enemy presence on Mindanao and recommends bypassing Morotai and the Palaus to strike Leyte in the Philippines instead. MacArthur agrees, canceling the Morotai landing, but Nimitz insists the Palau invasion proceed. The islands offer a prime anchorage, and troops are already en route. Major General William Rupertus, commanding the 1st Marines, confidently predicts a swift victory. It will be a short, hard-fought operation. 4 days, 5 at most, though casualties may be heavy. You can be sure the 1st Marine Division will take Peleliu. The assault goes forward, and Nimitz's decision becomes one of the most debated of the Pacific War. The Japanese expect the U.S. to attack the entire Palau chain, which includes several air and naval bases. Most troops remain on Babelthorpe, the largest island, but they correctly anticipate a southern landing. They reinforce Peleliu and Ongar with about half the Palau garrison. The elite 14th Division, redeployed from China, forms a corps defense, supported by Navy, air, and construction personnel. Unlike earlier battles, Japan no longer defends at the beaches. Instead, their new doctrine emphasizes defense in depth, allowing landings but turning the terrain into a fortress. The aim, prolong the battle and bleed Allied strength. A revised field manual states, in light of the enemy's overwhelming naval and air bombardment preventing our reinforcements, it is essential to exploit terrain, natural cover, lulls in enemy fire, weather, and atmospheric conditions, especially squalls and clouds, to our advantage. Naval historian Samuel Eliot Morrison concluded bluntly that proving Peleliu worth the cost would be a steep task. Admiral Halsey's suggestion to bypass Palau had merit. With few Japanese accounts available, arguments about value tend to emphasize the wasteful loss of American life. It's also true that bypassing Palau would likely have spared about 10,000 Japanese lives and preserved the traditional homes and livelihoods of Palau's islanders. The ironic and bitter lesson. The U.S. learned from Peleliu, but so did the Japanese, who duplicated Nakagawa's defense elsewhere, and experience did not prevent even higher casualties later in the island-hopping campaign. If you want more on the Pacific War, see our previous episodes on Saipan and Okinawa. Thanks for watching on Patreon or Nebula. We couldn't continue without your support. I'm Jesse Alexander, and this is a real-time history production, a channel that aims to be lavish with ammunition and stingy with men's lives.